somewhat courteous. He begins by talking about the fact that having Job reflect on his past life, that, Job, you had times in your life when you instructed others, you taught others, you helped others when they were going through some difficult time. And he finally then concludes then in verse 5, he says, now it's your turn. Now it's your turn. And so what's going on here is the roles are somewhat reversed. It's our turn to come and talk to you and to offer you and teach you about, instruct you through the things you're going through because you did it for others and now it's your turn. And so the roles are reversed. And his first question is, are you going to be impatient? Are you going to listen to us? So that's what Eliphaz starts off with. And it's very interesting when he gets down to verse number 7. Well, first of all, in verse 6, he says, Job, you have fear, you have confidence, and you have integrity, and you have hope. But his insinuation here is that these are unfounded because he's now in some kind of a sinful condition. And he kind of gets to the point in verse number 7. If you look down at verse 7, which Wayne read for us, he says, remember, who that was innocent ever perished, or where were the upright cut off? So his point here is that this is the orthodox view that we talked about some last week. And this is the view that not only did his friends take, but Job also took at that time, that if a man is blessed with good things in this life, then he must be a righteous person with God. But if a man has nothing or loses everything and is diseased, then he must be a sinful person whom God is now rewarding appropriately. And this is what they call the orthodox view. And that was the view that Job had and his friends had until now. And now Job now is in the seat, and he doesn't like that view. But that was the orthodox view. And so the insinuation here is, when has God ever done something, to an innocent person? And so the insinuation is, Job, you've sinned somehow. Now, what we're going to get into in this very next section, and it goes from verse 12 through 21, is Eliphaz now explains this revelation he had from God. It was basically something that God appeared to him in a dream and told him the ways of life, and that this is the way things are. And so he's going to reveal this revelation or this dream, and that is what we're going to read here in verses 12 through 21. If I can get a reader for that. Okay, Kelly?
Now a word was brought to me stealthily, and my ears received a whisper of it. Amid disquieting thoughts from the visions of the night, when deep sleep falls on men, dread came upon me, and trembling, and made all my bones shake. Then a spirit passed by my face, the hair of my flesh bristled up. It stood still, but I could not discern its appearance. A form was before my eyes, there was silence, then I heard a voice. Can mankind be just before God? Can a man be pure before his Maker? He puts no trust even in his servants, and against his angels he charges error. How much more will those who dwell in houses of clay, whose foundations is of the dust, who are crushed before the moth? Between morning and evening they are broken in pieces. Unobserved, they perish forever. It is not their tent or plucked up within them. They die, yet without wisdom.
Okay, so Eliphaz here explains his general overall view of life and religious life, and it's all centered around this revelation, he says, that God had given him in this dream. And it's the profound realization of the sinfulness of man. In fact, he even talks about, and we'll talk about this here in a little bit more, about, even if God holds the angels accountable, how much more will he hold man accountable for the way man acts? And that is pointed out in verse number 18 on your handout, is that if God charges the erring angels, won't he also deal with sinful man? Now this idea appears again in Job. If you want to flip over just a few chapters to chapter 15, in verses 15 and 16, this is again repeated by Eliphaz. In chapter 15, he says, "Behold, God puts no trust in his holy ones, and the heavens are not pure in his sight. How much less one who is an abomination, abominable and corrupt, a man who drinks injustice like water." So Eliphaz repeats this later on in another cycle. The concept is true, though, the fact that God does deal with erring angels. We know this is repeated in the book of 2 Peter, chapter 2 and verse 4, that angels that sinned are dealt with, and also that's repeated in Jude, verse 6. So angels certainly have free moral agency and can also sin. But, Eliphaz's point here is that, if God's going to make things correct with erring and sinful angels, don't you think he's going to correct sinful man? Now, the point here, and as we move on here into the next chapter, and that's chapter 5, is that the insinuation here is that, Job, you're that sinful man. So at this point, Eliphaz really hasn't passed judgment on Job, but the insinuation is there. If God charges erring or sinful angels, then what about sinful man? And basically in our vernacular we would say, Job, if the shoe fits, wear it. And so that's kind of the what he's leading up to here. And he's going to get more and more direct as we go throughout the book of Job. But right now he starts off soft, but he's going to start building. So he's going to build up the fact that, Job, you've sinned. Okay, any thoughts or questions before we get into chapter 5? Ed?
Yeah, just one quick one going back to verse 7. I've always wished I could stand there with Eliphaz and said, okay, no one perished without being innocent. Tell me about Abel.
Tell me about who?
Tell me about Abel.
Yeah, right.
And it's a case where you put a whole bunch of things together and you draw a conclusion, but that doesn't necessarily mean the conclusion is right.
Right. And he's going to continue with this same train of thought now. And so chapter 5 is just a continuation of Eliphaz's speech here. So I'd like us to take a minute and read verses 1 through 16. Kevin, can I get you to read that for us?
Call now. Is there anyone who will answer you? To which of the holy ones will you turn? Surely vexation kills the fool, and jealousy slays the simple. I have seen the fool taking root, but suddenly I cursed his dwelling. His children are far from safety, they are crushed in the gate, and there is no one to deliver them. The hungry eat his harvest, and he takes it even out of thorns, and the thirsty pant after his wealth. For affliction does not come from the dust, nor does trouble sprout from the ground. But man is born to trouble, as the sparks fly upward. As for me, I would seek God, and to God would I commit my cause. Who does great things and unsearchable, marvelous things without number. He gives rain on the earth, and sends waters on the fields. He sets on high those who are lowly, and those who mourn are lifted to safety. He frustrates the devices of the crafty, so that their hands achieve no success. He catches the wise in their own craftiness, and the schemes of the wily are brought to a quick end. They meet with darkness in the daytime, and grope at noonday as in the night. But he saves the needy from the sword of their mouth, and from the hand of the mighty. So the poor have justice. So the poor have hope, and injustice shuts her mouth.
Okay. He gets into a lot of ideas here at the start of chapter 4, and one of the things he points out, it's there very subtly, but Job is the fool he talks about here in verses 2 through 5. He says, surely vexation kills the fool, and jealousy slays the simple. And then he says, I have seen the fool, and then he starts going down a list of things. He talks about this fool's dwelling. Well, Job has lost his dwelling. He's lost everything. He talks about the fool's children. Guess what? Job lost all his children. They were all killed. He talks about the fool's harvest. Job has no harvest. Job has nothing. And he talks about the fool's wealth. So he's starting to lay a case here that Job, here's what happens to a fool. Oh, is that what happened to you? And so there's just this insinuation that he's starting to make. He's starting to lay his case that, Job, you are the fool. You are this sinful man. And therefore, Job, you are the one who's being chastened by God. So it's very subtle, but that's where Eliphaz is going. He's basically saying, Job, I've told you about the fool, and that be you. You are the fool. You've lost your dwelling, you've lost your children, you've lost your harvest, you've lost your wealth. Again, if the shoe fits, then wear it. Okay, any thoughts on that before we move on to the next section? Because he's starting to lay the groundwork here for that. Okay, another very famous verse, which is repeated a lot, is in verse 7. He says, but man is born unto trouble as the sparks fly upward. And that's a very famous quote. There's also a similar verse in Job 14 in verse 1, and which says, and this is Job talking here, he says, man who is born of a woman is few of days and full of trouble. He comes out like a flower and withers. He flees like a shadow and he continues not. So Eliphaz points out that, man is just born unto trouble. And then later Job repeats that idea that we are born, we have, as mankind, as dust, as these living souls, we are few of days, and our lives are just full of trouble. Now he brings this to a point in verse number 8, and I don't know if you caught it, but in verse number 8, he basically tells Job, you need to start seeking God. He says in chapter 5 and verse 8, he says, as for me, and I'll catch you in a second, Kevin, as for me, I would seek God, and to God I would commit my cause. So he's now giving Job a recommendation. Job, you're the fool. You're the one that's lost your dwelling, you've lost your children, you've lost your harvest, you've lost your wealth. If I were in your shoes, as for me, I would commit my cause to God and I would seek God. Kevin.
In verse 7, do you know what that phrase means? As the sparks fly?
I saw so many commentaries. I don't feel comfortable telling what I think it means, but sparks, if you've ever hit, a hammer on a piece of metal, sparks do fly upward. And I think it's a colloquialism or a saying that it's the analogy is made that we in our life as human beings, we have troubles and they happen just like sparks fly up. And I think it's an analogy that's been made, but the commentaries were just across the board on that. So I don't really feel comfortable giving you what I think it is. I just think it's an analogy that's being made that certainly was understandable in Job's time. But verse 8, he says, Job, if I were in your shoes, I think I would seek God. So that's his point. He's been leading up to this to make this point that you ought to seek God. Any other comments before we move on? Marvin.
Well, it kind of occurred to me after getting into this here, and I may be wrong, but I don't think any man since Job has lived through what Job has went through. And I think these men here really don't understand what's taking place because they have never seen anything like this.
Yeah. All of them, and I have to throw Job in that mix too, they all had an orthodoxical view up to this point in time that if good things happen to you, you are right with God. If bad things happen to you, you're sinful. Now, this is all going to come to a screeching halt because Job keeps saying, I haven't sinned. I haven't done anything terribly wrong. But yeah, I don't think the friends truly understand. I think up to this point, Job doesn't understand either. But we're going to see a lot of this come made right, when we get to the end of the book. But Eliphaz continues his thought, though, about God. And in verse 9, he says, Job, God does unsearchable things without number. And that's a very true statement. There's a similar passage, and I put on your handouts there in Ecclesiastes chapter 3 and verse 11. Remind me if I don't flip the screen for you. He says in Ecclesiastes 3:11, he says, he, being God, has made everything beautiful in his time. Also, he's put eternity into man's heart so that you cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. God just does amazing, unsearchable things that we just can't always explain or understand, but it's an amazing statement. And I think it's a correct statement. Now, he's going to lead on, though, as we keep going in chapter 5, and he starts down a list of he's. And he talks about God does all these things, and he causes rain, and he sets on high those that are lowly, and he frustrates the devices, he catches the wise, he saves the needy. He goes through all these, all this dialogue, but then he kind of sums up again in verse number 17. And his point here in verse 17 is God does also discipline us. And so don't despise this, Job. And so he says in verse 17, behold, blessed is the one whom God reproves, therefore despise not the discipline of the Almighty. So once again, there's this insinuation, Job, you've sinned, so don't despise this. God is dealing with you. He is disciplining you. So, again, if the sandal fits, put it on. And so, God is what's happening is God is disciplining you. That's his explanation for all these things that have happened to Job. Verse 18, he says, he binds up and he wounds and he makes whole again. So the idea here is that, Job, you're being chastened, you'll make things right with God, God will bind you up, and God will make you whole again. And so he will deliver you from 6 troubles, even 7, no evil. So he goes on to this whole idea that just make things right with God and you'll be made whole again. He will bind you up and he will heal your wounds. So that's where he gets to. And really, the bottom line that he gets to is, Job, you're being chastened. You're being chastened by God. This is of God, and that's why all these horrible things are happening to you. And so his encouragement really to Job is, you're being chastened, so endure this. Endure this, Job. Take your medicine, because this is what God is doing this, and it's for your betterment, and it's because of your sin. So that's kind of a summary of Eliphaz, this first dialogue. That's his points to Job. And like I said, he's very subtle at the start, but then he finally comes out and says, you're being chastened, you are the fool, you've lost everything, and this is because you've sinned somehow, and you've got to get right with God. And so that, again, is, and what is so frustrating to Job, and we'll get into Job's reply here in just a second, what's so frustrating for Job is that Job is looking back and he's saying, I haven't done anything super sinful. And he does acknowledge, and we'll see, I think maybe in this next reading, that Job understands that man does sin, but he keeps coming back saying, I haven't done anything grievous. Why is all of this happening to me? And so Job is going to reply, and we'll start now in verse number 6. And if I can get someone to read verses 1 through 4. Short reading, 1 through 4. Okay, Marvin, thank you.
When Job answered, oh, my grief was actually weighed and laid in the balance together with my calamity, for then it would be heavier than the sand of the sea. Therefore my words have been rash, for the arrows of the Almighty are within me, their poison my spirit drinks. The terror of God are arrayed against me.
Okay, so Job here starts off just how much suffering he's going through. And he talks about the weight of all this calamity. He says, bring out the balances. Bring in the balances, because the weight would be heavier than all the sands of the sea. That's a lot of weight. And so he's very sincere in these thoughts, and he says, the arrows of the Almighty are within me, and the terrors of God are arrayed against me. So he's just indicating how grievous his burden is. And he's saying it's heavier than the sands of the sea. And he's going to then go into a set of rhetorical no's in these next couple verses. I'll read verses 5 and 6, and we'll stop there for a minute. And so he asks a question. This is Job. He says, does the wild donkey bray when he has grass? Or the ox low when he has his fodder? Can that which is tasteless be eaten without salt? Is there any taste in the juice of the mallow? My appetite refuses to touch them. They are as food that is loathsome to me, or that's unpalatable. What Job is saying here is these are all rhetorical no's. He says, does the donkey bray when he has his grass? Of course not. He's got his grass. He's happy. Does the ox low over his fodder? No, the ox is happy. He's got his fodder to eat. Can that which is tasteless be eaten without salt? I always think of the white of an egg, but he talks about something that's tasteless. And he makes an insinuation here also to Eliphaz, and it's very subtle. He says, my appetite refuses to touch them. They are as food that is loathsome to me. What he's saying here is that, Eliphaz, your words are unseasoned, like an unseasoned piece of food, and it's just not palatable to me. That's what Job is really saying here. He's saying, Eliphaz, the things you have told me, they don't set well with my palate. These are unpalatable, these are unseasoned, and I will not partake of them. I will not touch them. And so that's his subtle reply to Eliphaz. And so we're going to get now more into Job's desire that God would just kill him or cut him off. And so I need someone to read for me. And if I miss a hand, be sure and raise it. Ed, can we read 5 through 13? Or did you have a comment, Ed? I'm sorry.
No,
Okay, 5 through 13.
does the wild donkey bray over his grass? Or does the ox low over his fodder? Can something tasteless be eaten without salt? Or is there any taste in the white of an egg? My soul refuses to touch them. They are like loathsome food to me. Oh, that my request might come to pass, and that God would grant my longing. Would that God were willing to crush me, that he would loose his hand and cut me off. But it is still my consolation, and I rejoice in unsparing pain, that I have not denied the words of the Holy One. What is my strength, that I should wait? And what is my end, that I should endure? Is my strength the strength of stones? Or is my flesh bronze? Is it that my help is not within me, and that deliverance is driven from me?
Okay. So Job here is again expressing a desire, God, just kill me. Just go ahead and kill me. Just go ahead and cut me off. That's what he's insinuating there in verses 8 and 9. But then he goes back and he says, in his justification in verse 10, he says, I have not concealed the words of the Holy One. So he's again standing up for his cause, saying, I haven't done anything sinful. I have stood up for God and God's word. And so he is very perplexed. He doesn't understand why these things are happening to him. He's in so much pain. Again, as he says, if a balance is around, it's heavier than all the sands of the sea. And he just says, God, just kill me. Just cut me off. And it's a very interesting analogy he makes in verses 11, 12, and 13. He basically mentions, he says, his strength is gone. He says, I'm not, God, like a stone. God, I am not like bronze. I am not hardened like a stone or like bronze. I'm a human being. I'm dust. And so it's almost a reminder to God, I don't have this kind of strength. I can't keep going like this. Kevin.
Just a comment on verse 10. I've often wondered how man knew what God's will was before the law of Moses. But here Job makes reference to the words of the Holy One.
Yeah.
So if this was set in the patriarchal age, then there were some words that...
There were some words, yeah. And like I said, you can read commentaries. Most commentaries think this was written during the time of Abraham, during the patriarchal age. But you're exactly right. They understood what God's will was. Okay, anybody else before we move on? Oh, I'm sorry. Rick, yeah.
Something that's bothered me from the beginning of the chapter 4, how did they know that God chastened angels?
I don't know. That's a good point.
Words, evidently. What happened to that text?
I don't know. But
And if they knew that God chastened angels, why didn't they also know that evil comes from Satan, not God?
yeah. And that's the interesting thing too, and you bring up a very good point. Satan's never talked about again outside of Job chapters 1 and 2. And so all that's in the background behind the curtain, and then, we're left dealing with these realities of Job's condition. Very good questions. I wish I had answers for you, but very good points, though. But yes, it is mentioned. They seem to understand that if God punishes angels, he'll punish man. So Job is going to, after this concept about his strength is gone, he reminds God and his friends, I don't have the strength like a stone or like bronze. I'm a human being. And then now he turns against his friends and basically tells them that they are false friends. And so if I can get someone to read 14 through 24. 14 through 24, and we'll go through that. Okay, Eric, thank you.
To him who is afflicted, kindness should be shown by his friend, even though he forsakes the fear of the Almighty. My brothers have dealt deceitfully like a brook, like the streams of the brooks that pass away, which are dark because of the ice, and into which the snow vanishes. When it is warm, they cease to flow. When it is hot, they vanish from their place. The paths of their way turn aside. They go nowhere and perish. The caravans of Tema look, the travelers of Sheba hope for them. They are disappointed because they were confident. They come there and are confused. For now you are nothing. You see terror and are afraid. Did I ever say, bring something to me, or offer a bribe for me from your wealth, or deliver me from the enemy's hand, or redeem me from the hand of oppressors?
In verse 24.
Teach me, and I will hold my tongue. Cause me to understand wherein I erred.
Okay, so Job basically comes out in verses, thank you, Eric, in 14, 15, he basically tells them, you're false friends. You are not true friends. You should have been showing me kindness, and you're sitting here now making accusations. So he calls them false friends, and he even makes an analogy, and you have to kind of pick it up from verses 15 on down. He talks about that they are treacherous like these torrential streams that pass away. He's talking about waters that happen from torrential rains or from melting snow and ice, and there's these pools of water, but then people in caravans come out to find these pools of water and they're gone. They're not there anymore. And he says, you're like these torrents of water. You show up and you're empty. You're not true friends. You are not showing understanding. You're not showing sympathy. And that's really what he's asking for. He wants them to show him kindness. And if you look down at verses 22 and 23, all Job asked of his friends, he wanted some understanding of his situation, and he wanted some sympathy. He did not want money, and he didn't want any valiant deeds. And really, he kind of sums it up in that last verse I had Eric read in verse 24. He basically says, name my sin. Name my error. You tell me. Teach me, and I will be silent. Make me understand how I have gone astray. So you tell me, friends, quote, unquote, where have I gone astray? You tell me. So he's kind of laying the burden back on them. You tell me where I have gone astray. And then we'll conclude the last of chapter 6 here because he makes another point that sympathy and understanding are sometimes hard to get from people. And sometimes they're costlier than charity. And let's read, I'll read this one, verses 25 through 30 through the end of the chapter. He says, how forceful are upright words, but what does reproof from you reprove? Do you think that you can reprove words when the speech of a despairing man is wind? Would you even cast lots over the fatherless and bargain over your friend? But now, be pleased to look at me, for I will not lie to your face. Please turn, let no injustice be done. Turn now, my vindication is at stake. Is there any injustice on my tongue? Cannot my palate discern the cause of calamity? So Job has a couple things he's pointing out here. He wants some sympathy and understanding, but he says these come at a cost. And he basically tells them, and I can almost picture this, him raising his disease-infested body and his face and eyes looking at his friends. He says, look at me. Look at me. I would never lie to you. So he's just coming to the point. I won't lie to you. And in verse 30, he's basically saying, your words are unsavory. They're not palatable. Your words are tasteless. Again, a reference to verse 7 earlier, when Eliphaz, he said, Eliphaz, your words are like an egg without salt. They're just not palatable. So very strong ending here in chapter 6. He tells them, look at me, look at my face. I won't lie to you. And so he's making a very strong point of his innocence. Okay, well, Job's not finished. We're going to do chapter 7, then we'll be done for tonight. You got about 10 minutes, and I think we'll get through this. Job now continues to talk about his suffering and his fact that he is in so much discomfort. And let's read verses, can I get someone to read verses 1 through 7? 1 through 7. Kevin, thank you.
Has not man a hard service on earth, and are not his days like the days of a hired hand? Like a slave who longs for the shadow, and like a hired hand who looks for his wages. So I am allotted months of emptiness, and nights of misery are appointed to me. When I lie down, I say, when shall I arise? But the night is long, and I am full of tossing till the dawn. My flesh is clothed with worms and dirt. My skin hardens, then breaks out afresh. My days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle, and come to their end without hope. Remember that my life is a breath. My eye will never again see good.
Okay, there's a lot of things compacted right here. First of all, he makes this example. He says he feels like he's a person, and he talks about a man who earns wages, and a servant that, a hired hand, and like a servant, the hired hand, he does his duty, he does his job, and then he looks for the wages. He goes, my wages are emptiness and misery. Now, he makes a reference here to months of emptiness. I don't know how much time has passed. We don't know how much time it took for his friends to find out about his condition and travel from wherever they were and then sit with him for 7 days before this whole dialogue begins. It could have been months. And so Job is saying, I'm like a hired hand. A hired hand at least gets wages. And what do I get? I get emptiness and I get misery. And then he goes on and talks about the fact he can't even sleep. And I don't know about you, I've had insomnia. It's not fun, especially if you're troubled about something. And there's verse 4, he talks about the fact that he just can't sleep. He says, when I lie down, I say, when shall I rise? But the night is long and I'm full of tossing until the dawn. So Job hopes to find relief in sleep, but the night apparently is even worse than the day. So he's apparently suffering from insomnia, and he talks about the fact he's just tossing and turning. He's not getting any rest. And verse 5, I think, is a hint at some of the mental anguish and the physical anguish are kind of reinforced, because we're going to get a description in verse 5, and it's rather graphic of the condition of his skin. We don't really know what disease he had, but it's pretty graphic here. He says, my flesh is clothed with worms. That means worms or maggots, and dirt, and my skin hardens and breaks out afresh. He talked about the skin breaking open and pus coming out. And pretty repulsive description. So his flesh wears like maggots, like clothes. His skin is caked with dirt and is scabby and festering and oozing with pus. Pretty graphic, pretty awful situation, pretty awful disease. Don't know what it was, but you got to understand, Satan made it as miserable for Job as he could. And so Job is in a lot of physical and mental anguish. Now, he turns, almost like he turns his head and looks away from his friends here in verses 6 and 7. He makes a comment to God. And if you look down in verse number 7, this, I believe, this is what most commentators believe, is that this is where Job turns and addresses God. He says, and I'll read verses 6 with 7, my days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle. They come to their end without hope. Remember that my life is a breath, and my eye will never again see good. And that a statement appears to be addressed to Job himself. Job wants God to basically take notice of him, but he also wants God to leave him alone. Just cut me off. But he's reminding God, I'm just flesh and blood. My life is a breath. And he also, in verse 8, reminds God that, don't worry, God, it won't be too long and I'll be dead anyway. And that's what verse 8 says. He says in verse 8, he says, the eye of him who sees me will behold me no more. While your eyes are on me, I shall be gone. So Job's reasoning here is that he's going to be dead soon, and God will see him no more, and it will just be too late. God, it's going to be too late. I'm going to be gone. I'm going to die from all these things. And then Job gets fired up a little bit more again in verse 11. And he says, I'm not going to restrain my mouth. I'm in so much anguish, I'm not going to be quiet. And he says in verse 11, therefore I will not restrain my mouth. I will speak in the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. And so he does a very interesting reference here to some Canaanite concepts. And let me flip over here. Yeah, this is where we're at, he makes a reference to Yam, the sea, or Tannin, a sea monster. And I need someone to read 11 through 21, and then we'll wrap up some finishing thoughts here. You can read? Okay, Kelly?
Therefore I will not restrain my mouth. I will speak in the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. Am I the sea or the sea monster that you set a guard over me? If I say, my bed will comfort me, my couch will ease my complaint, then you frighten me with dreams and terrify me with visions, so that my soul would choose suffocation, death rather than my pains. I waste away, I will not live forever. Leave me alone, for my days are but a breath. What is man that you magnify him, and that you are concerned about him, that you examine him every morning, try him every moment? Will you never turn your gaze away from me, nor let me alone until I swallow my spittle? Have I sinned? What have I done to you, O watcher of men? Why have you set me as your target, so that I am a burden to myself? Why then do you not pardon my transgression and take away my iniquity? For now I will lie down in the dust, and you will seek me, but I will not be.
Okay, so Job kind of concludes his comments here in 11 through 21. He makes a reference to some Canaanite names. He talks about, and it literally translates Yam, Y-A-M, or the sea, and Tannin, the sea monster. And basically the point is, God, am I a sea monster? Is that why you're doing this? Am I some kind of a monster that you're doing this? And so he kind of goes through that thought process. And then in verse 17, it's very similar language to Psalms chapter 8. What is man that thou art mindful of him? And so he kind of brings up that concept. But he also reminds us in verse 19, he does not have a moment's privacy. He says, I don't even have a private moment to swallow my spit. And I don't really know what that reference is, but he just says, I don't even have one moment of privacy. God's hand is upon me. And in verses 20 and 21, he begins a series of questions for God. And Job is still, I would say, integrity here. He's not, later on in the book, we'll get into where he actually starts making some accusations against God. But here he just asks questions of God. And it's a series of questions. And he says, what have I done to you, God? Have I sinned? Have I transgressed? And then the second question is, why haven't you forgiven me? If I've transgressed, why haven't you forgiven me? And really the point here is, Job knows that he and all other men are sinners, and he knows that God's remedy for sin is forgiveness, so why doesn't God then forgive him? And then Job again goes back to his reminder to the Almighty that, well, don't worry, God, I'll be dead soon, and it will be too late, so you won't find me. You'll look for me, God, but you won't find me because I'm going to be dead. So Job is in a lot of anguish and a lot of pain. and he desires death. He wants death. And he's even asking God just to cut him off or kill him. And the final mark I have down here for you at the bottom of the handout is Job does not know what's happening in the background. And I think little does Job know that God is watching all of this and listening to all of this, probably with silent compassion and admiration for his servant Job. And this will continue really until the test is fully done for Job. But Job right now at this point just does not understand. Ed.
Job's going to vacillate like this to the very end, where at one point he seems absolutely hopeless. There's nothing more to do, just kill me now, like he's present. Then there'll be other times that I still didn't understand what I've done. God, please inform me. I'd like to argue my case before you. And so he waffles right between that fine line, right there.
Absolutely. And as someone pointed out earlier, I don't know anybody that we read of in the Bible that went through a suffering like this. Maybe you could say that Jesus went through that with the sufferings on the cross, of course. But this was just a horrible thing he went through, to lose his children, his wealth, everything he owned, his wife telling him to curse God and die, and then Satan being given the privilege to do anything he wanted to Job, save, sans, take his life. And so certainly Satan gave him something extremely painful. And like I said, the description is maggots encased in his skin and his skin breaking open with pus. It's very graphic, and he sits there with a potsherd scraping his skin. And so it's very, very graphic. Jordan.
One thing I learned today, I was studying the book of Job, I found it really interesting. When Job's wife says, curse God and die, in actual Hebrew, it's bless God and die. And a lot of scholars think that she's maybe speaking sarcastically, but that seems to be their verses.
Yeah, I've read that too. It could be just get it done, bless God, and die. Take your place with the dead.
The point is, it's not as harsh as it sounds in English.
Yeah, and it's hard for us, to ascertain what her intent was. We don't see body language or tone, but certainly not a pleasing situation for Job to be in. Very awful. And so for next week, and thank you everybody for your comments and your attention, we will have handouts for chapters 8, 9, and 10. That'll be our next section, and we have the next friend, quote unquote, making his accusations against Job, and so we'll look at Bildad. So anyway, thank you everybody, and we will pick up next Wednesday. So thank you.
Good evening. Before Brian brings us the invitation tonight, we'll sing song number 220, He Lives. Todo sol. I serve a risen Savior, He's in the world today. I know that He is living, whatever men may say. I see His hand of mercy, I hear His voice of cheer, and just the time I need Him, He's always near. He lives, Christ Jesus lives today. He walks with me and He talks with me along life's narrow way. He lives, salvation to impart. You ask me how I know He lives. He lives within my heart. In all the world around me, I see His loving care. And though my heart grows weary, I never will despair. I know that He is leading through all the stormy blast. The day of His appearing will come at last. He lives, Christ Jesus lives today. He walks with me and talks with me along life's narrow way. He lives, salvation to impart. You ask me how I know He lives. He lives within my heart. Rejoice, rejoice, O Christian, lift up your voice and sing eternal hallelujahs to Jesus Christ the King, the hope of all who seek Him, the help of all who find. None other is so loving, so good and kind. He lives, Christ Jesus lives today. He walks with me and talks with me along life's narrow way. He lives, salvation to impart. You ask me how I know He lives. He lives within my heart.
Thank you, everyone, for being out tonight for the Bible study, and thank you again for all the comments for those of you that were in the Job class. I'd like to talk to you just for a minute tonight for the invitation about the importance of small words. You might recall that in the garden, when Satan is trying to deceive Eve, and she tells Eve that, God has told us you will surely die, Satan's response is, you shall surely not die. And I want to point out that there is another very important word that Jesus uses, and it's the word if. And in John chapter 14 and verse 15, one of my favorite verses because there's a turnaround to John 15:14, but Jesus says, if you love me, keep my commandments. So if we truly love Him, we're going to follow His commandments, and we're going to obey them and keep them. And by the same token, he says in the reciprocal verse, John 15, verse 14, he says, "You are my friends if you do what I command you. No longer do I call you servants, for the servant does not know what his master is doing, but I have called you friends." So we're called Jesus' friends if we keep his commandments, and we're told that if we love him, keep his commandments. And ironically, there's a whole lot of people that are mentioned by Jesus in Matthew 7 that think they're doing his commandments, and it reminds me a lot of the world today, the religious world, of people that think they're doing the right things. And Jesus tells these people that he doesn't know them. In Matthew 7 and verse 21, he says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? Did we not cast out demons in your name? Did we not do mighty works in your name?' And then I will declare to them, 'I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of iniquity,' or workers of lawlessness." These are people that are religious people here in Matthew 7 that Jesus is talking about. They call him Lord. They refer to him as Lord. And they even refer to the fact that they did many, many things. They prophesied, they cast out demons, they did mighty works in his name. Jesus never denies that they did some of these things. He says, you did these things without my authority. There's a whole lot of things that are being taught in the religious world today that are done without his authority. And I'm afraid there's going to be a lot of people on the day of judgment like these that are going to say, "Lord, didn't we do this and didn't we do that?" And Jesus' reply is going to be, "Depart. I don't know you. You're a worker of lawlessness. You're a worker of iniquity." Let's make sure that we are following God, his commands, and the only way we can do that is to read his word, to study his word, and to follow it and to obey it. And then we can truly be friends with Jesus. If you're here tonight and you would like to have a study, we would love to study with you about becoming a Christian. If you're here tonight, you're already a Christian and you need the prayers of the congregation, we're here to help you and pray for you. We want to help each other to go to heaven. I want to go to heaven. I want my wife and my children to go to heaven. I want every one of you to go to heaven. And let's make sure that we're following his word, by his law, by his authority, and his commands, and then we can be friends with Jesus. If you're subject to the invitation anyway, we bid you to come while Kevin leads us in the song.
Song. In loving kindness, Jesus gave my soul in mercy to reclaim, and from the depths of sin and shame, through grace he lifted me. From sinking sand he lifted me, with tender hand he lifted
Please bow with me as we close in prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we're so grateful that we've had the opportunity to meet together this evening, to learn more of your word, to try to gain a sense of what Job went through and how much he loved you and he trusted you. Help us to apply that process, just that belief, that faith in our lives. The troubles that we go through are so minuscule to what he sat there and went through with his friends, and just the physical. Just help us to realize that, and for us to know that you are there for us as well through every adversity. We ask that you be with us as we leave this place. Help us be a positive influence on those about us, that we may bring more souls into you. In Jesus' precious name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Kevin. You going to go ahead and shut that down? Okay.